Hello, I'm Gwenydd Jones of the Translators studio. We specialise in teaching the art of translation. In this video, I interview John Worne, the CEO of the Chartered Institute of Linguists. John's going to tell us about the Certificate in Translation exam, that's the CertTrans exam, a degree-level translation qualification awarded by the Institute. Translators, I give you John Worne. Can you tell us briefly about the Chartered Institute of Linguists?
Yes, look, the Chartered Institute of Linguists has been around for over 100 years. We're an organisation that supports language professionals around the world. We have about 7,000 members around the world, many of whom are translators and interpreters, but also general linguists and people who work in business, the professions and government. And we're also an awarding organisation, a regulated awarding organisation, and we offer professional qualifications for translators and interpreters.
And so we're having this interview today because we want to talk about your certificate in translation, the CertTrans qualification, a level 6 qualification for translators. Can you tell us a bit about that qualification?
Yes, happily. The idea behind the CertTrans, as we call it, it's a degree level qualification. And really what we're wanting to do with that is, I suppose, reach out to people who are both early on in their career, so that can be early career in terms of having recently left university, or it can be early career later in life after having had a family or at another stage of life. So it's very much for people who have strong language skills, but are either launching themselves or in the early stages of a career and looking to work in translation. So that's the sort of prime idea that we have in mind, to help people in the earlier stages of their careers. But also there are a large number of people out there who will be thinking about work with international organizations, potentially the United Nations family. Every country in the world has its own diplomatic and government services. So we also think that the DipTrans gives people, the CertTrans, I should say, gives people a really nice credential to talk to international organizations and show the skills that they have in writing and in their languages.
So you don't necessarily have to be a translator already, or even necessarily have much translation experience to go for this qualification?
We think that with preparation, and we have developed a study guide, and then of course we would strongly recommend that people consider organisations such as yourself, Gwen, for training and support. But we think with some focused training, some self-learning, and then some study, we think this is an achievable qualification for someone who has graduated in a language. So we can't tell people that this is going to be easy. It's a challenging qualification, it's degree level, and it is a translation qualification. So, there's a requirement for accuracy, precision, and to understand also some of the norms and expectations around translation in terms of how close a text needs to be to the original. But yes, this is designed to be a qualification that people can take and succeed in who have graduate level languages.
I'm so happy about this qualification because the DipTrans is a brilliant qualification to have, and it's one that we've strongly supported. But it's brilliant to enable this bridging qualification to allow the linguists to develop their skills. I think it's going to be really interesting to a lot of people. One question that I'm often asked is by linguists, or even perhaps quite experienced working translators, who have become proficient in their second language. They don't have the native level of the language, so we're talking about English, Spanish to English, for instance, but they're very good, but they perhaps don't quite have the level to pass the DipTrans because of the details involved and the difficulty in passing that exam. If you've got somebody with this level of proficiency, could they potentially attempt the CertTrans going into their second language?
Yes, we think that's exactly the sort of person that the CertTrans would be useful for. So it's adding further strings to your bow. So you will know that the convention would be that translators, you would expect them to be translating into their first language, but the reality of the world of work as it now is that many people will have several strings to their bow, and also the reality of the sort of work that clients want is such that they may want two languages at the same time. And then there are, of course, adjacencies in language families. So there are some languages which are comparatively close to each other, and therefore a speaker of one will have a closer reach to another, as well as people who live in fantastic countries like Switzerland, where you'll have several languages at the same time throughout your entire childhood and life. So all of these cases, I think, are cases where people can demonstrate a further capability, and the CertTrans is ideal for that sort of situation, because of course the way that people have picked up languages can vary tremendously from person to person: heritage, community, living abroad, or obviously academic study. So I think what we want the CertTrans to do is hit many different needs and enable people to have that credential, which basically says, I have this skill, and and gives them confidence. I think one of the facts of life for anyone with languages is part of the challenge is your own self-confidence, because if you're outside of your first language, there's always a kind of a little demon in your head saying, is this good enough? Am I getting it right? Am I making a mistake here? So I do think also to give people confidence in those additional and further languages would be valuable for them.
The other thing that we found with these proficient linguists on our courses is they've actually examined, for instance, they've got the C2 qualification, they've examined in their second language to the highest possible level, and they still want to improve their writing. And so working by starting to practice working and learn how to translate into their second language, it's another way that they can take those writing skills up even higher, up to potentially offering it as a professional service.
Well, and the other thing, of course, is, and we do sort of almost think of the DipTrans as the kind of concert pianist qualification. Anyone who has a very, very high level of skill would recognize that you have to keep practicing it in order to retain it. So there's a certain amount of muscle memory with human skills, but there's also a certain amount of practice and repetition that's necessary. And I think one of the other things that the CertTrans can do, and that's why I was keen to say that early career doesn't necessarily mean young in life, can be at any age and stage. The point is that many people will have languages that come up and then go down. So, I've interviewed people and spoken to people who have had, very, very high levels of professional linguistic competence, who haven't used their languages for 2 or 3 years, and, they've really, really drifted. And that's when the kind of self-confidence thing comes in again, and and then you can go into a bit of a negative spiral with languages where potentially you start to lose it. Now it will all come back again, of course. It's not lost forever, but it can be lost. So I mean, people that I work with who had done university postgraduate study and in those languages now don't feel confident to use them. As I say, it's all there, but the lack of use has caused it to drift. So all of these cases, I think, are cases where you can encourage someone to, refresh, renew, and rebuild confidence, as well as, of course, people starting afresh, who've just come out of university or, want a qualification because they're a heritage speaker.
A question that I'm often asked are from translators in different parts of the world who work into English, and they are asking me, but it's US English. Can I do these exams going into US English? Is it all right if I'm writing the exam in American English?
Yes, I think the general rule of thumb here is that we're looking for consistency. So if so long as what is produced is consistent, and in English the main differences would be English and American English. So long as you're respecting the norms and conventions of one of the two forms, then that would be perfectly acceptable. I mean, obviously there are complexities around dialects around the world. So if you take, for example, DipTrans, which has got other language into other language and all sorts of potential complexities, there are complexities and nuances. But I think for this qualification, it's very straightforward. English, and American English are both absolutely fine.
I think a lot of people will be pleased to hear that. And I think the last question that maybe some of our listeners will be asking is, this is a new qualification. If I go and I get it, are agencies going to know about it when I put it on my CV?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question. And, I think I'll have some good news. If you interview me in a few weeks' time, I think I'll have some very good news for you on that. We're currently talking to all the stakeholders, but I think, if you look at how the sector and the industry works, I think everyone is incredibly keen to see more talented people joining the profession, and everyone, sets their standard at degree level. So a degree level qualification that gets more talented people joining the profession, I think they're going to be incredibly positive about it. So I'm very confident we'll get all the endorsements.
I'm glad to hear that. And we've talked a little bit about the DipTrans, and in the show notes to this recording, I'm going to put a link to our video about the DipTrans. But just briefly, what are the basic differences between the CertTrans and the DipTrans for somebody who's unfamiliar with these qualifications?
Well, the first and most obvious is the number of units. So the DipTrans is 3 units and the CertTrans is 2 units. So slightly fewer hours of examination is one difference. Second difference is that in terms of the general level, the DipTrans is up at what in the Common European Framework of Reference is known as C2. So it's it's at the kind of most stretching level of competence. The CertTrans is pitched more at C1 level, so that's more at degree level. And I suppose what that translates to in practice is a little more tolerance of some mistakes and errors that may happen in the CertTrans. In the DipTrans, there would be we're looking for perfection really in the DipTrans in terms of perfectly rendered product, whereas in the CertTrans we're looking for something that still needs to be a very good translation, but there is some tolerance of errors of vocabulary, some tolerance of minor errors of grammar. And I would encourage people to have a look at the specification for the CertTrans, which is on our website. And there what you have is a full mark scheme, which shows you basically what tolerance for errors and mistakes there is in the CertTrans, so people can understand more or less where they would need to be pitching themselves. There are some other materials on our website as well, which we can probably make available in links around the text around this, which would also give people against international rating scales, which give you descriptors of what you would be expected to achieve, will again give people a means to sort of self-assess. And I would say that preparation is necessary for the CertTrans. You need to understand the conventions of translation. You need to practice your language. You need to master dictionaries. There are things that people need to do to be successful in this qualification, but it is a qualification which is designed to reward some preparation. And of course, people have been on a course like you offer to get them through and into the world of work. That's what we want to do.
That's brilliant. I'm really loving what I'm hearing here. I'm very excited about this qualification. Terrific. Thinking about our viewers as well, and the people who are looking at your different qualifications, or people who want to get into the world of translation. Maybe they've never translated before, maybe they are in English teaching, or maybe they're editors, copywriters, they're in some kind of related profession. Or perhaps just living in the source language country in another job that they want to leave, and they're thinking, how do I become a translator? And what I find is a lot of them are weighing up, do I go down the route of taking an MA in translation studies, or do I go down the route of doing the CertTrans and then the DipTrans, which is the best option for me? What would you say to them?
Well, look, it's a slightly complicated answer to a very simple question, but I'll give you a slightly complicated answer. Having worked in universities, because I did spend some time and have spent some time in my career working in universities, you're basically looking for slightly different things, and what a person doing these qualifications gets at the end of it is a slightly different experience. So if you think about what you're looking for in an undergraduate or a master's degree, you're looking for differing degrees of ability to absorb new knowledge, ability to understand an overall discipline, ability to research a topic, and ability to also demonstrate independent thought. And depending on the level that you're at in, in university studies, the amount of that varies. Classically, at a master's level, you'd commonly expect to see a dissertation, and in a dissertation, you would commonly expect to see somebody basically tacking out the parameters of a discipline and understanding it in in some detail and complexity. Good example of this, I worked at a world-renowned art college, the Royal College of Art, and of course, if you're doing painting at the Royal College of Art, we would expect you to produce an astonishing painting, but also you would need to produce an astonishingly good dissertation as well, which would explain something about, the context of art and the context of a particular area of art. And I think that's probably, the thing that a person who's thinking about a master's might want to be recognizing, that in doing a master's, you're probably studying something about what translation is, how translation fits into the world, what the history of translation is, what the latest trends in translation are. You're studying something about the discipline. Whereas to some extent, if you're doing a vocational qualification of our sort, what you're really doing is a little bit like at the Royal College of Art, you're producing the painting. So can you produce a knockout painting is the thing. So one of them, if you like, is more the study of everything around the topic, including the topic. The other one is, can you do the specific task that demonstrates you are fit for work? Now, from an employer's perspective, you'd probably like both, but I guess from an employer's perspective, what you really want to know is, can the person do exactly the task which is required? So I think that's probably the difference. The other difference is the amount of time that someone can give to something. If you're doing a master's, you're talking about full-time study for at least a year. So, that's time and cost. So I would say that, if you want to know everything about a topic and all the things that are around it, grow yourself as a person and demonstrate your intellectual capabilities, a master's in translation is a wonderful thing to do. But if you want to demonstrate that you can absolutely do the task, translate to the highest standard, and have excellent language abilities, and are instantaneously employable and can take on clients, then CertTrans is a good thing to do.
That was a brilliant answer. I've never heard it quite put like that, because I'm normally reading my own writings and my own thoughts, and that really did sum it up wonderfully.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm going to go a little off topic now, because I'd just like to address another concern that I regularly hear about from linguists who are thinking of moving into translation. And that relates to the growth of artificial intelligence and machine translation. What would you say to that? Is that a valid concern in any way?
Well, certainly I think, and this would be true of pretty much any job you can think of in the world these days. Certainly any knowledge-based job, technology is absolutely a part of translators' lives. And I think as I said earlier, we're a professional body and a membership organization as well as a qualifications organization. So what we can see with our membership is an increasing use of technology. So basically, in our most recent survey, the majority of our translators are now using tools to support them in their translation work. So I think most people would say that the idea that you would have just a pen and a paper dictionary is obviously long gone. But by the same token, the skills that are required in terms of meaning and who the end intended audience is are still the same. So I suppose the optimist in me would say that a lot of the duller work kind of falls away. So if you've got translation memory then, and you've already translated something, then do you really want to think about exactly how you translated that fairly mundane phrase again? No, maybe it's just great to have that already served up for you, so you can spend your time thinking about the important nuance and point that is being made and how best to carry that across. So I would say that the first thing is that meaning. I think what we know is that technology is not good at meaning. Technology is good at matches, in effect. So it kind of matches things, but it doesn't necessarily understand the nuance and meaning between things. So I think there's a good space for the human being in there. The second thing is, of course, as we know, disproportionately some languages are sampled by technology and others aren't. So obviously English is massively sampled for translation purposes. European languages are well sampled, but other world languages are sometimes very undersampled in the data sets that train algorithms and train translation tools. So there's unevenness in terms of the quality of translation. So that is also a factor. And ultimately, I think what it comes down to is this point about the loss of meaning and the loss of context, which is the great risk that that post-editing and machine translation generate. So I think the optimistic answer is embrace technology, use it, takes away the drudgery, and gives you more space to focus on the more, probably the most exciting and interesting end of the work. I do think, though, that it's a reality that it would be very difficult, I think, to be successful. If you're starting your career and you're looking forward to working in translation for a number of years, embracing technology, I think, is a necessary part of being a translator these days.
I agree with you. I was actually quite surprised when you didn't say that 100% of our members are using technology in some way in their work. That I know a couple of people who still haven't bought a cat tool, but it's a very, very small percentage of people now, I think.
Well, I think the other thing to say, related to that is, and I'm sure you will have found this as well, is that I think, and again, you would see this with music. This is quite common with people who work in music. So many people who work in music will, probably teach a bit, will gig a bit, might write a bit, and they'll have, different elements in their music career, if you like. And I think that there's quite a lot of experience of that. And indeed, there's a nice little resource that we have on our website, which again, I can give you the link to, around the lives of translators, that to some extent, although you might have translation as the core of your career, you might also have other related disciplines, language related disciplines, that you get into, as part of your journey, in effect. Because particularly if you're doing work for clients, you often get referral work, and then you get drawn into other sorts of work. So I think the part of this is recognizing that even if the translation core sometimes comes under some pressure, there are language-related disciplines that use those skills. So there's also the opportunity to build a portfolio around a core, or have translation as part of something which is built around another core.
Yes, that's true. The other thing that I know about translators, particularly having taught so many of them, is that they tend to be people who have done very well. That they tend to be really smart people, and people who, once they've mastered something, they want a new challenge. And so I think a lot of translators will choose to diversify, not because they can't find enough work in translation, or not because machine translation is putting them out of work, but simply because they feel they've mastered an area and then they want to do something else, so that they have more variety in their lives. And it's one of the joys of being a freelancer as well, that you can do that with quite a lot of versatility. And coming back round to these qualifications, it's why these vocational qualifications are so good, because you don't have to tie up all that time and all that money in a master if you don't want to. You can go for the vocational qualification, and that can help you, build out your CV and have different work opportunities.
I think that's very true. I think that's true of the world of work, in general these days. That you'll read plenty of articles which say that you need to train for 4 or 5 different careers in your working life, going forward, and the sorts of stable kind of single employer careers that might have existed 20 or 30 years ago, just not in the modern economy. So I think that kind of resilience and plasticity that language professionals have is incredibly useful. But I also think, as you say, there is a thing about to some extent, anything that you do for intensively for a very long period of time, you kind of have explored that domain of human knowledge, and sometimes it's nice to explore an adjacent domain, isn't it? So I think that's part of keeping life fresh and interesting. And of course, languages give you lots of routes into adjacent domains. So I think having the confidence and the solidity that sits with having the qualification, I think almost frees you up then to be more exploratory in terms of where where you can go with it, because you've always got that solid foundation of a career anchor, if you like.
It's been very interesting to speak with you today. Before I let you go, I just wanted to ask you one final question, which is, what message would you give to up-and-coming translators?
I just think it's a fantastic career. I mean, if you look at, we see this at our conference every year, which is a joyful event. You know, such wonderful people, such interesting individuals, such interesting work, you know, in terms of the ability for many people to be self-employed and set some of their own parameters. I just think it's a terrific career, and just really, really lovely people to be part of the community of. And that's the other thing I would say that, you know, we haven't mentioned it thus far. I think the great thing about a qualification and, you know, undertaking some study towards it is joining a community of people who are incredibly welcoming and supportive. I mean, I think the translation and indeed the interpreting community are just lovely, lovely communities to be part of.
I absolutely agree with that. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you, Gwen. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this interview from the Translators Studio. We specialise in teaching the art of translation and in preparing translators for certification through the DipTrans exam. If you like our content, please let us know by clicking on the subscribe button. See you in the next video.